We're now in a new time, we're in a new century, we're in a new decade, and since 9/11, there's been major shifts in the way that the world perceives itself, in the battles that we face, in the way that technology has moved forward, in the generations that have been born. And are we still expecting the form of the 20th century to be the only or appropriate form for what is to come in the 21st century? And this weekend is really a chance to explore what is the Spirit saying to the churches in the 21st century, what is God saying in the mission to the West, and how we need to position ourselves, and what is the main move or the main ideas or the main paradigms that God is wanting to move us into. It seems that each century there's a major shift or a new stage. And many are saying that this century, the 21st century, is the mic gone off? Oh, there it is. Okay. The 21st century, whereas the 20th century was more about the new wine, the 21st century is about the new forms. It's about the wineskins, the structures. It's about how we make disciples. It's about what does the church look like when it meets anywhere. So if you're in the workplace, the church would be there. If you're in the street, the church would be there. If you're in the cafe, the church would be there. The church would be wherever people are. And that's some of the shifts that God is wanting to bring us into. And Alan's going to be describing and exploring some of this during the weekend, and so will we. But when you look at that film that we saw earlier that was on the screen, have you ever imagined, when you look at people like that and others who are not in churches right now, what would church look like amongst those people? What would it sound like amongst those people? How would they meet? Where would they meet? And although the forms of church may be working for us and the people that we're already gathering and meeting, there's forms of church that are still to be explored, that the Gentiles or those far away from God would be able to explore and worship in whatever format that is. And that's really where we're wanting to stretch our imaginations. We're wanting to allow God to change the way that we think so that we can engage these tribes in a different way. So Mark was saying that in order to keep or contain the new wine that God's wanting to pour out, we need the new wineskins. If you pour the new wine into the old skins, the skins are already stretched and they then burst. So we need to make sure that we've got the right vehicles, the right containers for the new thing that God's wanting to do in this generation. But that passage, that story is also in Luke. So let's turn to Luke and have a look at it there. Because there's some insights there that are not in Mark. So if we look at Luke 5, 33 to 39. And it said to him, the disciples of John fast often and offer prayers. So this is an addition here. The last one just said they fasted, now it says they offer prayers. And so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours eat and drink. So it's added on there, yours eat and drink. So there's this kind of this really bad accusation to Jesus that his disciples actually spent a lot of time eating and drinking. And then Jesus said, can you make wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? And that part's pretty much the same. But then when you go down to verse 36, he told them a parable. No one tears a piece from a new garment and puts it on an old garment. If he does, he will tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. And no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, and it will be spilled, and the skins will be destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. And no one after drinking old wine desires new, for he says the old is good. In this one, Luke has highlighted some things that are slightly different to Mark, or adding more emphasis. And Luke is basically saying that we need to protect the new. So he's saying that if you attach the new garment to the old, you tear it and actually damage the new. And sometimes when we're exploring new forms of church, we often don't go far enough. We compromise with the new forms that we're doing to try and please or to suit the old. So we actually don't allow a brand new wineskin to actually emerge. We always try and water down the new to please the current form that we already have. And actually, I would encourage us to actually break out a bit further now and actually start to create new forms that are not watered down in any way, shape or form, that don't try and compromise or comply with the kind of churches that we already have. Because in that way, you're actually preserving and you're protecting the new forms, as opposed to this muddy kind of in-betweenness that's neither an old form or a new form. It's something that's so in between that it only kind of slightly pleases those Christians who are beginning to experiment, but it doesn't really go beyond that to some of the people who are really far off. You know, what would a form of church look like for the Muslims who are meeting in the mosque, for example? Have any of us ever explored what a real indigenous church in amongst the Muslim community would look like in Britain and Europe? In a way that didn't water it down or make it safe for us, but in a way where those coming from Muslim background could worship God in their heart language and organise themselves in a way that matched their rhythm and culture. What would that look like? What would it look like if you see some of the videos, some of the guys that look like they're in gangs? What would an indigenous form of church look like? Not one where we have a way of doing church and we kind of temper it slightly, kind of make it slightly nicer to try and fit other people, but actually we allowed completely new forms to emerge out of the soil of those people. What would that look like? And that's something that we're wanting to grapple with today. But, you know, many of us will say when we see these new forms, yeah, but the old is better. And, you know, sometimes the wineskins that we're used to are the best wineskins for us. You know, they help to contain us, they help to contain that revelation that God poured out in a particular time. It helps to preserve that body of teaching. And that might be fine for us, as long as we don't restrict the new forms from really truly emerging, and as long as we don't try and dilute the new forms to match the old forms, or even worse, try and get the old forms to slightly move into the new when sometimes it doesn't work. So let's look at another passage on the wineskins. Let's look at Matthew 9. So Luke is really careful to want to protect the new thing that God is doing. Don't ruin it. Don't ruin the wineskin, don't ruin the clothing, don't ruin the garment by trying to attach new things to an old thing. That's very clearly what Jesus is saying there. Luke also says the new and the old don't match. So if you try and attach the new to the old, the problem is that they don't match each other. So allow them to be parallel at the same time, but don't try and attach them together where you actually dilute or cross-pollinate in such a way that it's neither one nor the other. And I wonder how many of us, when we see these, will be like those ones that say the old is better. You know, I think there's a good way of saying the old is better in terms of, you know, like a real understanding of yourself, saying, actually, I do prefer the kind of church that I'm used to. Whether that's a church that meets in a house or whether that's a church that meets in a building or whatever. You know, there's nothing wrong with being honest and say, actually, the old is better for me, as long as it's not a kind of criticism of the new. The old is better, so you're projecting that on somebody else. I say the old is better in a kind of either sarcastic or underhand way. The old is better, this is rubbish kind of way. So we need to make sure that we don't dampen the spirit of the new by saying, oh, well, the old is actually better than this. If we look at Matthew 9:14, Matthew highlights something else. Matthew actually is more concerned with the old wineskins. So whereas Luke is more towards the new, Matthew is saying something different. It says, Matthew 9:14. So we see the same thing at the beginning. Why do your disciples do things this way and not the way that we've done them in the last 20 years, or the way that we've done them in the last 100 years, or the way that we've done them in the last 5 years? Why do your disciples practice habits and patterns and ways of meeting that's very different to what we are used to, what the Pharisees are used to, what the Pentecostals are used to, what the New Wave churches are used to, what the Methodists are used to? Why do yours do it in a completely different way? That's basically what they was asking Jesus. Why don't you do it like the way that we do it? Why don't you do it like the way we've always done it? So Matthew says, Matthew 9:14, let's go down to verse 16. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. So Matthew is actually highlighting the old garment has a hole in it. The old way of doing things there's a problem. And the idea is, let's try and patch this problem up in some way. And he's actually saying, if you try and patch up the old, you actually make the tear in the old system even worse. So he's actually wanting to protect the old system so that you don't make the thing even worse than it already is by trying to patch on a part of something new and attach it in a way that's just a band-aid onto the old. So Matthew's saying, don't do that. And then he goes on to say this. Verse 17, neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skin bursts, and the wine is spilt, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved. And we often do one or the other. We either scrap the old wineskins, or we attach the new to the old in this kind of hybrid way that's neither one nor the other. Or we try and slow down the hemorrhage of the old by kind of grabbing little bits of the new, but not really a wholesale change. And actually what would be better is to say, if there's a group of people who meet in a certain way, and they are engaging God, and Jesus is at the centre, and there's life there, let it just be as it is. Preserve that old. But at the same time, make sure that new people groups, new tribal cultures, new expressions or revelations of what God is doing is housed in something that is truly new at the same time. So you have these two parallel systems going on at the same time. What the Anglicans call the mixed economy of church, but making sure that they really are truly new forms, as well as preserving the inheritance that we already have. So these are interesting passages about the wineskins. Where are we at in terms of the way that we do church? Are we in a wineskin that's a previous inherited model? Are we exploring new forms, or both? And are we really pushing the boat with the new forms to make sure that they're truly new forms and not these diluted, watered down things that are neither one nor the other? And are we truly honouring the old in a kind of parallel partnership type of way, but without this kind of attachment that makes this kind of inebriated, hybrid, something that is neither one nor the other? So let's move into looking at the book of Acts. I just want to highlight a few things there. So if we go to Acts 1. So even as we know, after Jesus was with the disciples for basically 3 years, and then he comes back and he talks to them for 40 days about the kingdom, they're still asking questions from an old wineskin, old paradigm kind of way. When are you at this time going to restore Israel? Is now the time that you're going to do the thing that we actually thought you was going to do in the first place? And Jesus basically just passes it off. It's not for you to know that now, but the thing that you need to do is that you need to wait in Jerusalem until the power comes, and then you will be my witnesses, and so forth.